This section is called Using Budgets. The areas of the syllabus are the benefits and drawbacks of using budgets, a calculation and interpretation of favourable and adverse variances, and using variance analysis to inform decisions. This should lead on from our previous lesson on budgets. The first part, there are two sections in this presentation. In the first section, you should be able to state the benefits and drawbacks of using budgets and identify the features of a good budget. So let's try and think what the benefits of using budgets are. So, first of all, provide direction and coordination. The organisation could have numerous people working within it, and if they're all trying to meet their own aims, then it will be less successful for a business. If they're all trying to meet a joint aim, then that should ensure that the business performs to the best of its ability. According to Mayo and Hertzberg, teams and individuals are encouraged by responsibility and recognition gained from meeting budgets. Not everybody will be motivated by aiming to meet targets, but there will be a percentage of staff where that will be the case. By setting a budget, this should improve efficiency. This is because it will give managers and the organisation workers a target to work towards. They'll look at causes and reasons behind not meeting the budget or meeting the budget in a positive way. And this should say reduce the amount of wastage that occurs in a business. And they assess forecasting ability. It's not always possible to predict the future, but if you can, it allows you to be much more careful in your evaluation and realistic about what the business can do. With everything where there are positives, there must also be drawbacks also. So they're difficult to monitor fairly. A senior manager might have several budget holders under his control, and really it's unlikely that he'll be able to decide, have you actually achieved the budget to the best of your ability or not. A lot of it will depend on the honesty of the budget holder saying, I believe these are the reasons for this, or this is the reason that we weren't able to do this. Allocations may be incorrect. There are often costs that a business will have to incur, expenses that a businesses will have to pay, and through no fault of the business's own, it might change for the whole marketplace. So let's say, for instance, if there's insufficient expenditure budget for fuel and power, it's out with the business if the amount that you have to pay for fuel and power is changed. Savings may be sought that are not in the interest of the firm. So in order, let's say for instance, to bring raw materials in budget, the manager might decide to buy a poorer quality raw material. So there might be lots of wastage, there could be breakages, the quality might not be appropriate, and obviously that's going to have a big impact on the sales revenue that a business is able to generate. And change may not be allowed for when a budget is reviewed. It's really important for budgets to be reviewed on a short-term basis so that it can be a target that's achievable and manageable for a business. If you're not allowed to have changes, then it's inevitable that some of the budget targets are not going to be met. Overall then, what should a good budget have in it? It should be consistent with the aims of the business. So the manager should have adequate finance to ensure that they're able to continue with their element of the business to meet the needs of the company. It should be based on the opinions of as many people as possible. If we look at expenditure, it would be wise to include more than one judgment about how much we should set aside for these things. Similarly, everybody has different opinions about whether or not our products will generate a lot of revenue. So we'll base it on market research, but we'll base it on past performance and people's expectations, what they recognise as being relevant. And we could look at perhaps amalgamating all of those together to generate a realistic target. Set challenging but realistic targets. People are going to be demotivated if you say you've got to cut expenditure and you can have X amount, because realistically that means that something has to give. Similarly, when you give your sales staff targets for sales revenue in that month, they need to be realistic. Everybody should try and achieve an improvement, but only a limited improvement to ensure realism. It should be monitored at regular intervals. It's important that, let's say for instance, once the month of January is over, you look at the budget for the rest of the year. Something might have been evident to happen in January that might influence the budget for the next 11 months. And so it's important, coupling with be flexible. Don't give your business the opportunity to miss out on an improvement or target just because there's no money allocated in the budget. Business needs to be flexible in order to take the opportunities and be ready to take the opportunities that's given. Moving on from there, we're going to look at the topic area which says the calculation and interpretation of favourable and adverse variances. So in the last slide I spoke about the importance of, once January had happened, we would go back and review. So the element of variance analysis is to review what's actually happened. Okay, so a definition then: the process by which the outcomes of budgets are examined and then compared with the budgeted figures. So if you can imagine it, we're going to look at the actual and the budgeted amount. We should measure it each month and make comparisons. And a manager should then try and give some reasons for any deviances. So let's look at an example then. So in a business, the expenditure budget allocates £1,000 for stationery expenses, but the actual amount spent is £1,200. So variance analysis says take the budgeted amount and minus the actual amount and find the difference. In this case, there's two options for the difference. It could be an adverse figure or it could be a favourable figure. So the question that we would ask in this instance is, did you spend more on stationery expenses or did you spend less? If you spent more money, that means this business would have had to incur additional expenditure and it would be adverse. If you spent less, that would be good for the business and it would be favourable. So in this instance, it's £200 adverse. Just to recap then, a negative variance for an expenditure budget is adverse, and we'll see in the following slide a negative variance for a revenue budget is favourable. So let's look at this. So an income budget targets sales income of £65,000, but the actual amount of income received is £64,000. Again, we take the budgeted amount and subtract the actual amount and find the difference. Okay, so it's a positive number here. The difference is £1,000. So we would ask ourselves, has this business gained more sales than it budgeted, in which case it would be favourable, or has it not achieved the sales that it budgeted, in which case it would be adverse, and this is the latter. So just to recap then, Positive variance for an expenditure budget is a favourable variance, and a negative variance for a revenue budget is an adverse variance. Okay, overall then here are some rules that you can follow. An adverse variance means that less profit was made in the business than what you expected. This could have been because costs might have been higher than budget, and that would obviously be expenditure, or sales revenue may be lower than budget, so that's the income to the business. In opposition then, the favourable variance means profit is higher than what you budgeted for, and this might have been because costs may be lower than budgeted, or it might be sales revenue may be higher. An activity that we'll come to is looking at possible causes, and so it's important to recognise that each business scenario may give you a clue. However, I've given a list here of possible causes of the favourable income variance, and you know in class I'm going to ask you what would be possible causes of the adverse income variance, so you can try and think about that. Similarly, I've made some suggestions for adverse cost variances, and you know in class we'll look at what might be the cause of favourable cost variances. An examiner's tip then. Overall, they think for evaluation questions you should move up the skills level as quickly as possible. So two standard responses that you could give might be, although the overall variance is positive, they should look closely at. Give examples, raw material costs and wages and salaries, as these are over budget. So always begin with something that's over budget. There may be valid reasons such as the use of better quality materials, but the variances could indicate unnecessary spending in these areas. You could then find something in the case study that might be a clue here. As a summation then, finally, they should look at the sales revenue to see if the reason for the good performance of, and X would be product 1, could be applied to product 2, Y. And this would give an indication to the examiners that you knew you were able to link this to benchmarking. Okay, even if a variance is positive, it could be of concern. So you might ask the questions, why did they not anticipate the higher revenue or lower cost? And is there anything they can learn from this for next time? It's important that you use budgeting as a tool in order to improve your budgeting and assess your revenue and expenditure. The extent to which a variance causes concern depends on whether it's favourable or adverse. Okay, so just because it's a favourable variance doesn't mean to say it's a good thing. You should still investigate it to see if it's something that you can perhaps replicate in the future. You've got to consider how big the variance is, so you're trying to assess, is it significant? Should I, as a manager, spend a lot of time in trying to find out the reason, and then whether the managers can work out why it occurred and to learn from this.